Welcome to In a World with Real Media. I'm your host, Brad Burrow. In this podcast, we'll dive into the lives of the most successful people in business. We'll learn how they overcame adversity, took advantage of opportunities, and learned from their experiences. Learn from our experts, get inspired, then go live your story. It's In a World with Real Media. Hello and welcome to the In a World with Real Media podcast. I'm Brad Burrow, and today we have Haley Grayless with us on the podcast. And it's really funny, I'm going to tell this quick little story. So we had a Top Gun event here with Nick and Giuliani, and it was so awesome having everybody in here. But you spoke up and say, I want to be on 12 podcasts this year. And I'm like, I have one.
Yeah. So it's like, check, great. Good thing I said something.
Yeah. So Haley is passionate about helping leaders create a healthy culture, build team accountability, and increase profitability, all things that we should be focusing on, right, in business. So thank you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Brad. I'm so happy to be here.
So I've got you have an incredible background. I was looking through LinkedIn, and it's like so there's a lot of things that you've done that have kind of built up, your skill set and experience and stuff. One of the things that I really wanted to ask you about, well, a couple things, but Vessels International, I saw that. And it's like you were overseas for some time working with this organization.
Yeah. So I think middle school started learning through my youth group and stuff about like oppression and poverty in India, and being, a ambitious kid, I was like, sounds like that's something I could do to help the world. And so that was my goal after college, was to move to India and serve. And so I did. I raised support after I graduated from Mizzou, and I lived there for a little over a year, probably like a year and a half, in New Delhi. And
wow.
Yeah, I worked in shelter homes for kids, and did some other work, like just service work in the area. But I learned there that I was such an extrovert that it was a little harder to live there. I mean, I made friends, like Western people and Indians and stuff, but it was so hard, like mostly living by myself and working by myself. And it's not what I had expected. So I went from, I'm going to live here the rest of my life, to I think that this has been a good experience and I'm ready for.
So you went over there thinking you would stay.
Oh, yeah. I thought I was there the rest of my life.
Wow. So, Wow. And how long were you there?
Like a year and a half.
Okay.
And it was a wonderful experience, and I got to travel all around the country. But I just realized like I really needed more of a team or some sort of unit that was like supportive on the ground with me. And it was a very challenging, like lonely time. So
were you by yourself?
Yeah, I lived the first few months with some other American women, like right out of college also. And that was great. And then their duration was up because they were with a different organization. And so then I lived by myself, and it was really hard. Like I remember watching the movie Hope Floats on the 4th of July, which was my favorite holiday, in another country. And I remember just crying. I was like, Hope Floats was the wrong movie to watch alone. And so it was hard, but it was a great experience. And I look back on it with a lot of fondness, and I learned a ton of things about myself and the world.
Yeah. What an amazing experience.
Yeah.
I mean, just doing that by yourself, it seems amazing to me. I mean, that's something, I've been on missions trips and things like that, and you always go with a group of people.
Yeah.
And, you don't go by yourself to something like that.
Oh, yeah. That's not what I expected at all. So,
yeah.
It was hard.
Well, if you can do that, you can do anything, right?
That's kind of my mindset. Yeah. But when I was like 23 and 24, I think I turned 25 there, I realized that, like, wow, I mean, people didn't expect this, because like once I got there, the organization I thought I was going to be working with and what I thought I would be doing, they were like, we don't really know what you're talking about. We hadn't really we don't know who my director was in my organization. And so, but they were like, you can still live with our people. So I wasn't doing work with them because I hadn't gone through training with that organization and wasn't that denomination and stuff. And so I had to just figure it out. So I remember emailing my supporters, like everybody who was on my email list. And I was like, okay, here's how things have changed. I thought I'd be working with kids rescued from sex trafficking and like from the brothels, like their mothers were sex slaves in the red light district.
In India?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I thought I'd be doing that. And then that organization wouldn't let me work with them because I wasn't their denomination. And even though it's
like a faith-based type thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
They were Pentecostal and I wasn't.
Okay.
And so I ended up just having to like literally Google like non-government organizations in New Delhi that I could serve at. And it was great because I found some like organizations that were run by Indian folks who were doing this NGO work. And it was a really, really amazing experience because they welcomed me so much. And
Wow.
they were just happy to have my hands and feet to serve and help. And then it's funny because we're really jumping ahead, I think.
No,
but
that's okay.
I ended up doing a lot of work there with the team who was working at the main shelter home where I served at, doing organizational development and team building and leadership training.
The beginnings of what you're doing now.
But I had no idea what it was at the time. I didn't even know that you could really make a career in that. I just have that like natural talent and I can see the needs. And so I was like, oh, I feel like these folks maybe need some training because a shelter home staff in India wasn't able to obviously pay their people a high salary. So they were hiring people with a lower level of education, which makes sense. But so they hadn't had like the trainings that I had in college and things like that. So I taught them more about like appropriate ways to discipline kids and to like redirect them and stuff like that. And then ended up doing training on how to be an effective team and how the leaders can be effective with accountability and setting expectations. And it's so funny because now that's what my company does. And I didn't even think about it at the time that I could turn it into what I have now.
Do you remember the feeling getting off the plane?
Yeah.
Were you scared to death?
I was really scared. I did have my director with me when I first went there.
Yeah.
And somehow, I don't know if I took melatonin or if the universe knocked me out or something, but I slept the almost entire like 15 or 16 hours from Chicago to New Delhi on the plane. I don't know. I think I was so nervous my body just shut down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not that I was like regretting it, but it was just like such a gigantic change.
Oh,
and
my
left
gosh.
all my friends and they were all like, I don't know, partnering up and getting married. And I was like, I'm moving to a developing country. And so, I got out there and we figured it out. The first month I lived with a family so they were actually from Uganda, and the mother, the woman of the house, actually worked at the Ugandan embassy in New Delhi. So it was cool also to be in like the capital city of a country because I got to always see like the embassies and the embassy schools. And it was a really cool way because I had never even been to DC at that point.
Yeah.
So I lived in the capital of India before I'd even been to Washington, DC in the US. And so
That's crazy.
yeah. So it was very nice that they like let me live with them because it was a connection my director had. Lived in like a spare room and luckily had my own bathroom and things like that. So I had my own like little mini apartment, but then I ended up living with some other American volunteers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Food and stuff, did that take a while to get used to?
Well, I love Indian food, and
Okay.
but it's funny because like in
Good
America,
thing.
yes, but I was in charge of like I cooked my own meals for the most part, unless I went out to restaurants. But it's funny because in America I don't know if I guess people might be pickier, but I like to mix it up and have different cuisines all the time, like Thai and Mexican and Italian and I don't know, just a salad and just basic pancakes or whatever.
Yeah.
But in India, like if I was staying with friends or something, your breakfast would be Indian, and it wouldn't be like what I was used to. It wouldn't be like cereal or sausage and pancakes or something like that.
So what was it?
I'm trying to remember like names of things, but it
Yeah.
would be things that maybe had like fennel in them, and I'm like, fennel in this, I don't know, breaded item. And so it was challenging sometimes. Just it's not that I didn't like it, but it was like I'm a little over this like palate.
Yeah.
And I need something, I don't know, different or sweet or something like
Yeah.
that. So the food, I mean, it was great. And so I still I support my favorite Indian restaurant in Westport.
Yeah, I bet.
At least usually once a month, but
Yeah,
sometimes
that's-
more than that.
That's awesome. So then you went to United Way after that.
Yeah. So I was at United Way of Greater Kansas City.
So I bet the experience in India really helped probably what you're doing at United Way.
Yeah. So I was doing fundraising and I was there for 6.5 years. And it really translated well because I had to raise all of my own income and support for India. So I think that's why they hired me because I didn't really have like regular like experience, I guess,
Yeah.
because it was like my first real job. And but I mean, fundraising just kind of came easy to me also. Like
Yeah.
if you believe in something, as long as I believed in it and there was like personal meaning, it was pretty easy to sell that idea.
I could see that. I could see you being really good at that.
Oh,
and
thanks.
I know you just a little bit. So,
Yeah.
so United Way. And one of the things I wrote down, well, back up, Avila. So my son was a pitcher at Avila.
Oh, cool.
And so we know a little bit about Avila.
Nice.
But you got your master's degree there?
Yes, my master's.
Yeah.
Undergrad from University of Missouri.
Yeah. So why Avila? I'm just curious why you picked that school.
Really, it was the program they had, their Masters of Science in Organizational Development. And so I had met somebody at like a networking event. I think I went to some talk maybe through the chamber or some networking organization. And this lady who was a few years older than me was doing some, I don't know, some like professional development talk. And I was like, how cool is that she can do this for her job? And like,
Yeah.
what qualifications does she have? Not like I was questioning her, but I was like, what do I need to do to be able to do that? And so I talked to her afterward. I was like, I'd love to take you to coffee or breakfast or something and pick your brain. So she was so amazingly supportive. And I never thought I'd go back to school because while I like love the social side and everything, and I like learning, I didn't want homework and tests
Yeah.
and stuff. And she's like, well, lucky for you, there's like only one class with tests, and it was statistics.
Oh, yeah.
But that teacher made it really easy, and you basically got to do the tests like as a group, which I'm all about. But everything else was papers, projects, and presentations, the triple P. And
Yeah.
so she really sold it to me also. Like she was like, they really want you to be successful. They make it easy for people who have a full-time job because the classes are in the evenings, 6 p.m. to 10
Yeah.
p.m. And so, yeah, she got me interested and I applied and talked with them and I ended up doing it. And it was a wonderful experience. And I'm really glad I did it at that time because I think that their whole program's online now. And
Yeah.
mine was in person, which was so wonderful.
Was that pre-COVID then?
Yes.
Yeah.
I graduated in 2019 from it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. The next thing I had written down is predictive index. Tell me what that is.
Oh, predictive index is
Yeah.
great. So yeah, so it's actually a psychologically validated tool, and I love a lot of those personality assessments. I use Enneagram, I use Myers-Briggs. That was my first love, I call it.
So do
within
you
this
use
world.
this as part of like when you engage with a company or
Yeah,
something?
I can. Currently, I'm not a predictive index partner. I'm considering being that, but I was a consultant under another partner, and so I'm certified in it.
Okay.
And it's an amazing tool because it measures workplace behaviors. So all of those different personality assessments measure different things. So I kind of say it's like when you go to the doctor, they don't just take your weight; they have to also know your height, and they like look in your nose and your ears and your mouth, and they measure all these different things, blood pressure, and we talk about pulse and things like that. And so PI measures 4 different workplace behaviors that you can see, or behaviors that really drive the needs that you have based on what people can see. And so it measures your dominance level, extroversion, patience, and formality. So it measures everything on a graph also when you get a report. And it's cool because you can see the graph shows like a midpoint of like the average of the millions of people who've taken it since the 1950s. And then like you can have a super low level of any of those drives or super high level. So you can see so I have high dominance and a little higher extroversion, moderately low patience, and super low formality. So then those factor combinations based on like how does your extroversion relate to your formality? Well, I have high extroversion, low formality, so I'm a very informal communicator. So
Okay.
it makes me fun, but sometimes I say things but people are like, oh my gosh, have a filter. And it's like people need to lighten up,
Yeah.
But yeah, so then it could be flipped. If somebody is like higher formality and lower extroversion, they'd be a very formal communicator.
So I've
Probably
done
wouldn't-
like Colby and,
Okay,
and
yeah.
ones like that before, and it's interesting what you learn about how you make decisions, and,
Totally.
vision and follow through and all that stuff. So it's very, very interesting to know
Definitely.
that. And when you realize that you have certain things, then you know where you need help. So is that kind of part of, like, do you go into a company and evaluate, say, okay, everybody take this test, and then we're going to sit down and say, well, maybe you'd be better in this area. I mean, is it?
You can do that. They do have a job target assessment. So when they're hiring for a position, they have a few people take that job target analysis. And so like the probably hiring manager and then maybe high performers who are in that role, maybe somebody in HR, and they you select different words that are things that position will have to frequently do to be successful. So not once in a while, but like the things they'd have to frequently do. And then it literally creates a job target. So I'm a maverick on the predictive index. And so there are certain like roles that a maverick would fit well in. Yeah, it might be sales and stuff that's innovative and creative, people leading, where you get to present and be in front of people and take risks, like where I won't get my hand slapped if I take a risk and it doesn't work out. That kind of thing is good. You don't want me in a finance role. You don't want me in anything where I'm going to have to be really, really precise. There are maybe mavericks who could do that with the same type of personality, but they'd probably have a different value system or different, because like there's other things that play into it. But like my value is not precision, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's why the backup camera on my car has been a lifesaver.
Yeah. So it's funny. That's a funny thing because I have 3 boys, and my youngest, when he learned to drive, had a backup camera on his. He'd use our cars, and then he got a car and it didn't have one. It's like, Dad, how am I supposed to back the car up?
Oh yeah.
I'm like, well, maybe you should use your rearview mirror and actually do it the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah,
pretty funny. But that's funny you mentioned that. So Växa, tell me about Växa Collective.
Yes.
And one of the questions, I really appreciate you doing this, by the way. This is really great. I mean,
good.
And so it told me a lot about you. I mean, I've never had a podcast guest give me a printout of what you would like to talk about, which is really awesome. I think that's cool. So great job on that.
Thanks.
But Växa, tell me about that. And then one of your questions was, what was the inspiration to leave the nonprofit world?
Mm-hmm. So Växa Collective is the name of my company. I launched full-time in 2018. I was doing some part-time stuff when I still was at my other full-time job. And Växa is Swedish for to grow. So I was looking for a word that made people ask questions and like made people curious. Although sometimes now I'm like, maybe I should have made it more clear what my business does.
Yeah.
But it's fine. Maybe it'll be a rebrand eventually. But my dad's side is like Swedish. And so we always like, had, I don't know if people are familiar with like the little Swedish horses and the Swedish designs. Like my grandma's house like had those all over. And so, and actually my cousin and I are planning to go to Sweden and Norway this year to kind of visit the motherland. And so, I wanted something that made people ask questions and made people curious. And what I focus on is helping people and companies grow in their culture and their leadership and there's those skills so that people aren't miserable at work, because you don't have to be. And I once had a friend around my age say, but they call it work for a reason. But like, maybe that's just my maverick mindset and Enneagram 7, Myers-Briggs, ESFP. Like, I don't want to be there if it's not fun. Oh, and like human design, don't know if you're into that. It's like kind of related to astrology. I'm a generator in that. And like where generators get their energy is by doing things they like doing and not doing the things they don't. And it almost just feels like a cheat code for life. Like, wait, I can just not do those things. I mean, within reason, but that's not where you're going to shine, and it's not where you're going to serve the world in the best way. So, that's kind of like the connection there. So I started it because I had been in organizations previously, and I had seen just so much like toxicity, like when leadership changes happened and certain leaders were just checked out and maybe like, approaching either retirement or I don't know, they had other stressors in their life, and it really made the culture negative for everyone else. And so, I mean, there was a period of time, probably at least 6 or 7 months, end of 2015, where things got so bad that, I mean, I was like dreading work. And that is a flip. Like I went from like, my friends teased me about how much I loved my job and how on the weekends or evenings, sometimes I'd be like, well, I wish I was at work right now, because I loved it so much. And I think I was finding too much of my identity in my job, being a single woman, no kids. I didn't even have a dog at that point. So I found a lot of my like identity in who I am at work and being the superstar and that kind of stuff. And so when things went downhill and the culture really changed, it was shocking that like I had so much anxiety. I had never experienced that before. And my appetite went away. I had never experienced that before, where like I could barely eat. So speaking of like Indian restaurants, I was at Korma Sutra, now Moti Mahal in Westport. And I was there with my dad. He came up for my birthday that year in 2015. And I took 2 bites of my chicken tikka masala, and I was like, I'm sorry, I cannot physically eat anything else. And so I bet for 6 months, I maybe consumed 300 calories a day, because I could have like a Chobani single serve yogurt, maybe some cream in my coffee, and could barely eat because I'm so anxious. And I just felt like, like they don't trust us at work and we can't trust them, and they make this a miserable place to be. And so I I just kept thinking there has to be a better way. And that like Gandhi quote of be the change you wish to see in the world always resonated with me. And so I just kept trying to be that change and change things. And I was literally told to stop trying to be a white knight. Yeah. I was like, is that like a race thing? Or,
oh my gosh.
Didn't know what connection it was. But so I decided like, I'm going to that's when I kind of found that other person doing similar work, and I started my master's program in 2017, and it was definitely like a light at the end of the tunnel that could give me a shift in career where I could focus on helping other people also not be miserable. Because I wasn't the only one who said that. Like that sense of doom was something that other people were telling me too, like crying on their way to work, hair falling out because they had so much stress. Like that's like, a stress response our bodies have.
Does that mean I'm really stressed out?
It could. No, I don't know. I know I've said this to a few people who have baldness, and they mentioned the same kind of thing.
It's okay.
But I mean, it was awful. My hair was falling out like in just bigger amounts than ever before. It was so stressful, and I could barely sleep. There were nights where I'd wake up in like a sweat, or I couldn't sleep at all, and that's just completely unacceptable to me. Like if you are a leader, especially a C-suite executive, you got to be creating a great culture. Like I think Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yes, strategy is important, but culture should be part of your strategy and a major part, because you want people to love where they work. And if it's not a good fit, you can always like have a conversation where you find an opportunity to help them in another place. Or, it's not that you have to have everybody, like you've never have any turnover. There's always like some of that. But people should not be dreading going into their jobs. They should be finding joy in that within reason. It's like not, I always tell people, it's not like you have to prefer being at work than on a vacation. But if we're spending around 40 hours a week at this place, it should be somewhere where we are finding like personal fulfillment and we enjoy it, and we're at least not anxious and depressed. There shouldn't be doom associated with your job. Yeah,
no, I agree. One of the things that I wanted to kind of get into is, creating a healthy culture, building team accountability, and then increased profitability. Well, that all kind of works together, but some of those things people resist a little bit. It's like the accountability side of it. We're a bunch of creatives, and we love being creative, but the accountability side is something that we haven't really focused on that we need. Can you talk about that? I mean, the importance of that, and the culture. Is that the first part of that, the culture, and then the accountability, and then profitability comes after that? I mean, how does that all work together?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Yes, of course it all works together. I take my clients through 5 pillars of successful leadership, which builds a great culture, like process. That framework is what I do trainings on, and we do like team building activities around those things. And it all culminates together with the last pillar being practicing performance accountability. But the first thing that people have to understand as leaders is they have to model the accountability. And I see leaders all the time. I don't know. It's like language I don't like, where they will say like, oh, that's a problem employee, or that's an entitled millennial, or Gen Z doesn't want to work hard, and things like that. And all of that's a mindset thing that's just trash, and you have to get it out of your head. And I usually tell people, like, if you label, I guess a good label is good, but labeling people is not only just mean to them, but it's bad for our own minds. So I heard that so much in the last place that I worked at. Like leaders would say, oh, that's a problem employee. And it's so wild because it's like they'd say that in front of other people, which it was such a poisonous, toxic environment. So like that's the big thing where we talk about like accountability is like, here's how you can hold people accountable. It has to start with obviously emotional intelligence. You have to then understand what drives people. You can use PI, predictive index, or Enneagram, like use a personality assessment of sorts that everybody agrees on and can understand, so that you can understand yourself and understand other people, because that's going to help you support them. That's like the purpose of being a leader, or a manager, is to manage well. And then the most important pillar of that is creating a culture of psychological safety. So that was a term coined by Dr. Amy Edmondson in 1999, where she did this amazing study. We can get into it if you want. But what she found is that psychological safety is what set all these surgical teams apart from the unsuccessful ones, because psychological safety meant they could take risks and appear vulnerable in front of each other. And they could speak up and question the surgeon, like as a nurse or a surgical tech or something, without fear of retaliation, humiliation, humiliation or opportunities being taken from them.
Yeah.
So if anybody's like seen or listened to the podcast Dr. Death about Dr. Christopher Dunch in the Dallas area, he did like 38 surgeries within about a year and a half or something, and 35 of those resulted in people being maimed or killed because he was a neurosurgeon who focused too much on his like PhD side of his education, like at the university where he was at, instead of the like MD side. He didn't have enough time at all in the operating room when he was in school and residency, and so then he gets hired by Baylor Medical Center, I believe.
Oh my gosh.
And
Really?
so he had, I mean, they had billboards all over Dallas saying like, great new neurosurgeon. No, he was actually like a megalomaniac and narcissist who, if you watch these specials on him, oh my gosh, it was just crazy. Like he was intentionally being malicious, and they just let him get away with it over and over again and just kept sweeping issues under the rug. Instead of paying attention to the psychological safety they should have been integrating into the culture. So nurses were speaking up and other surgeons were speaking up, and they just kept acting like, well, we don't want to get sued, and we're just going to act like nothing happened and he can go find a job somewhere else, not be our problem. But even his best friend became a quadriplegic when he was operated on and ended up dying by the time I watched the documentary. So people should watch it. It's on Peacock. Yeah. And it said like by the time that went to into production, he had passed away, and it was because of complications. It's so sad. So that's like the implications of a lack of psychological safety. It can be so detrimental to a team and people's health and obviously people's lives if that's the type of industry.
So just
you're
the
in.
freedom to be able to ask, you know, hey, what about this? What about this? Or,
yeah, without somebody snapping at you. I mean, he would yell at people. He'd show up with like the same scrubs on from the day before, and they would know that, and unwashed, because there'd be like in the example that they showed in the show, there was like a rip in like the butt of his scrubs, and they could tell that he'd been doing drugs the night before, and he would just scream at people if they said, "Oh, you're operating on the wrong vertebrae, or like the wrong side of the neck," or he removed part of like somebody's esophagus because he thought that it was a tumor, or at least that's what he said. He destroyed another woman's vocal cords. Like, I mean, terrible things. And they couldn't, when they tried to speak up.
Sounds like a horror movie.
It literally does. But I think he's the only doctor in the United States who's been, and I'm not sure if this is exactly right, convicted of like criminal intent, and he's in prison now.
Wow.
Yeah, because they got him on elder abuse.
Wow. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about Top Gun.
Yeah.
So tell me about your experience with Top Gun. The event that was here, we mentioned earlier, it was really fun. The energy, you could feel the energy. You know, everybody was excited to be together. I'm like, this is really... I wish I could be in Top Gun. I think I'm too old. But anyway, I was really impressed with the group. And tell me about your experience with Top Gun.
Oh, yeah, it's been wonderful. So I joined in 2020. I think I even had my interview on Zoom because it was right like at the beginning of the shutdown of everything.
So you have to be interviewed to be in Top Gun. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they probably still do that.
Yeah,
it's been,
I think so too.
It's been a while for me, but and they asked really good questions. One of my favorite questions they asked, I think Scott Havens asked this, was if you had $1 million to donate to one organization in Kansas City, like one nonprofit, what would you donate to? And I thought that was such a cool question because it also kind of tests the temperature of the person of like, what do you truly care about? And do you even know what services are around you? And so that was something that stood out to me. So it's been a really fun, like, and casual group where, yes, we do networking events, and yeah, sometimes it involves a happy hour or something, but there's always meaningful like conversations. Right. And it's one of those networking groups, because I feel like the majority of the ones I've been in is not something where you feel like people actually hang out outside of it. But the good thing about Top Gun is people reach out to each other all the time, and like they're either hosting a dinner, like Michael Keenan hosts dinners, and I just got lunch with Allison from the Children's Place last week, and we're going to plan a girls' night, and it's wonderful. And then people like end up doing business together, but there's no pressure to do that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So what was the non-for-profit you said you would give $1 million?
I said MOXA. So, yeah, Metropolitan Organization to Prevent Sexual Abuse. What's the C? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do amazing work for people. It's mostly women who experience that. But it's amazing. So if somebody ends up being sexually assaulted or raped and they're in the emergency room, they send out a volunteer who like brings like a blanket and a sweatshirt and things like that to like sit with you in the emergency room or sit in the waiting room to support you if you have nobody. And I mean, that's amazing. And then they provide free counseling after that. So yeah, I mean, I've just heard great things about that organization.
That's amazing. So they work with the hospitals or whoever?
Yes.
And
yeah. There's a
they know who
sane,
to call?
Yeah. So I think that the emergency room, I don't know if MOX, I'm not sure how they orchestrate it, but there's a SANE nurse, SANE. It stands for something exactly. And that nurse at the hospital is like trained to care for people who've had that sexual assault. And then the volunteer will be there just to support and to give you any like any resources and things like that. So they're amazing. But I do know that their like one-on-one counseling is backed up a little bit, at least from when I know somebody who's using it. And I feel like you probably need immediate therapy after something like that. There shouldn't be a wait period, especially if somebody doesn't want to do the group therapy. That's great for some people. Some people want one-on-one. And so I just feel like if they need more money, you know, so people give money to Moxa so they can get more therapists so that people don't have a wait time. Yeah.
So one of the things I was very curious about, so you started Växa before COVID, right?
Yes.
So how did COVID affect your business?
Wow. So
loaded question, probably.
I was so optimistic about 2020. My word of the year was abundance, which is hilarious because I had abundance of alone time and a lot of nothing. I launched my company in 2018. Toward the end of the year is when I left my job and launched it. And so 2019 was okay. Did some business, but I still had not figured out how to sell really yet. And I thought fundraising skills would transfer a little more seamlessly to sales, and they didn't. And so 2019 was like, okay, but I was really like, okay, 2020 is going to be my year and it's going to be great. And I had a bunch of stuff on the calendar and everything was canceled. Everybody just canceled everything for just perpetuity in 2020 when like the shelter in place stuff happened. And so, I mean, I remember collapsing on my bed crying because I got the news about another thing being canceled. And then there was so much grief of like, these were things I was looking forward to and I need to make money. And I mean, thank God I had a very cheap rent at the house I was at, didn't have a car payment. I mean, I don't know how I did it, but 2020 was very challenging. But I just, there was a coach I followed online who I really like how she reminded people, pivot, don't pause. Put your business stuff online, do coaching online, do something where, if you can't do what you were originally doing, pivot, don't pause. And I was like, I could go get a job somewhere. And I kind of looked at a couple places where maybe I could work at World Market or Andy's or something, just in my neighborhood.
Andy's would be a good place to work.
Yeah. And honestly, they don't pay too badly. But when I asked somebody at World Market what they made, I was like, I just don't know if that's worth my time. I feel like I'd rather put my time and energy into still building my business. And I'm not somebody who can just go 60 hours a week or something. I like to have some self-care rest time. And so I'm so glad I did this, that I just kept being persistent with building my business and networking. I remember I had 20 Zoom calls on my calendar a week. Because you had to. And I mean, I needed the human connection with people. So it was hard, but I did get business. I did a lot of free stuff at the time, but it was good exposure. But exposure doesn't pay the bills, they say. And so, but it was good at the time to be able to do that. And I made it through the wilderness, and 2021 started picking up, which was good. I think I had a client in the Jeff City area, so I had and it was a really, really good contract I got somehow through Locked In, a connection there. They connected me, and so it was one full day session a quarter. So that paid really well, and I was so thankful for it. So 2021 really picked up. 2022 was getting more retainers, and I was just so thankful.
Is the retainer model a big part of your business now?
Yes, yeah, and that's obviously helpful as recurring revenue. Yes, that's good, and it's a nice security thing for me. But the reason I do it is because my biggest reason for even creating my business is not like, I mean, yes, money is important, but because you have to, support yourself, but I want to see impact.
Like it.
Yeah, I kind of like it. But I think it's maybe my like Christian and nonprofit background where I'm like, I have to have all these caveats about money. You can't like act like you need it or want it. But but really the biggest thing is that I want to see impact. And doing like here and there workshops and one coaching thing here and there, that's just not going to move the needle. Like people need consistent work. You can't just eat, like, if you're thinking about health, a salad once a week and then like pork chops and steak and cookies and ice cream all the time. Like, well, I had that one salad. Why aren't things changing?
Yeah.
Like it really has to be a consistent thing, like where it's integrated stuff into the culture. So that's why I like to work with companies on a longer term basis, where I can help support them and help them really integrate the changes into their culture, where it's starting from the top down and things are modeled by the CEO and C-suite and like other executives, and everybody is modeling it from the top, those behaviors that we're working on within those 5 pillars that I talked about. And then you actually see change happen. But culture is like one of those, it's a big ship, and it takes a long time to turn a big ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you selling and then doing the work as well?
Yeah.
So I have a really interesting question for you, because that used to be, still is kind of, but I call it the roller coaster of revenue, because you sell something and you're up here, and then you do the work, and then you go down, and then you go back up, and the retainer helps kind of fix that a little bit. But how do you balance? I mean, really, if you're doing a good job selling, you need to be selling all the time.
Yeah, and prospecting all the time.
Yeah.
My friend who's really good at sales, she works at Power School, so they sell like software to school districts. And she told me when I first like really got serious about like, I have to figure this out and how do I sell better? She was like, I read the book Fanatical Prospecting by Jeb Blunt. What a name. And it changed my whole business. Like, so I recommend it to anybody who is starting a business or in sales. Read and practice what he talks about in Fanatical Prospecting.
So what's the key takeaway from that book?
You have to be, he is kind of like
I know there's probably a bunch of them. But.
Yeah, and he's kind of a like frat boy bro kind of vibe. So I tell people like,
I like your frat boy bro voice there, bro.
I mean, and it's okay. But he'll say things in it like, you have to do this stuff so that you're not a loser, because you don't want to be a loser, do you? And it's like, okay, Jeb, like, people's value is not tied to what they produce, But he talks about how like the fanatical piece is like and I need to probably reread the book and get a little kick in the butt, but like, but at the end of the day, when you're like, okay, well, I'm tired and I don't want to make any more calls or send any more emails or follow up on any more networking connections, he's like, do 3 more. And like, that's what's going to change your business or your pipeline versus other people.
So now I'm totally convicted.
I know. Well, same. I'm convicting myself. Yeah. And he says that, and he talks about like kind of the math around it too, of like if you have 20 people in your pipeline and you get 1 yes, I feel like he says like you don't put because like it's so unlikely that all 20 will say yes. You don't replace it with 1 more, you replace it with 20 more. And so, I mean, I might be getting that wrong, but I remember listening to the book.
The idea.
The idea is like, okay, you got 1 that's, I don't know, it's maybe not likely that all 19 other people are going to agree to work with you. So it's just kind of just the consistency and it's like being so focused on it's okay to get no, because that's just going to get you to another yes. So it's a really big mindset thing. And I love that he also has a book called Sales EQ. So like the emotional intelligence of sales. And he's got one called Inked. So that's like closing the deal. One called Objections. So I've read, I think like 3 or 4 of those.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, they probably need to be refreshed in my mind. So I actually probably should reread them. But
so I don't want you to give away your secrets, but I'm really curious to know what your sales process looks like. I mean, for me, this is something I think it changes so much with technology, LinkedIn. I don't know if you've ever used Zoom Info, Google Ads. I mean, all the things that there's just so many things that you can be doing to generate leads.
Oh, yeah.
But what are you doing? What works for you?
Well, when I started actually using like the 5 or 7 step sales process that we used to be like colleagues, Amy Leslie, who uses predictive index. So she had taught me, I think, a 7-step process. And then I had also, I think Jeb Blunt in one of his books talks about like a 5-step process. But once I started like sticking to that and like not deviating from it, that's when I saw changes happen and I started selling more.
Really?
And yeah. And so, because I'm not a super like organized and process driven person, like I'm not going to create it myself. But if I find a system that works, I can try to implement it. Kind of like if people are familiar with like the KonMari method of like how you fold, the joy of tidying up and the throw it away if it doesn't spark joy lady.
Yeah.
You know her.
I think I know what you're talking about.
The way that she like, cleans her house and organizes her drawers and folds her clothes. Like when I watched the show on Netflix, I was like, oh my God, I can do that. And I did. And then for like a month after that, I'd love to go look at my dish rag drawer. I was like, it's so organized and pretty. But I would have never folded stuff like that. So it's kind of the same with
So it made you feel good to look at.
Oh, yeah.
Look
And
at what
or
I've
like
done.
even like my T-shirts, it's like, oh my God, they're crisp. And I know where they all are. And it's not just like they're shoved in there. But it's the same with a business process. So like the 5-step process being like having an opening. So like having a meeting with somebody and like getting to know them, asking questions. What my problem was before was I would have a discovery call with somebody and I would ask them like, oh, what are some of your struggles or what are your goals with your company? And they would share some issues and I'd immediately be like, oh, okay, well, here's what I do to solve that. And that's not what you're supposed to do in a sales call. Like you keep your mouth shut and you say things like, okay, yeah, and I mean, that's what I learned works. And you get all the information. I fill it all out on my little Google form. And then I say, okay, this is great. I'm going to put together a proposal of solutions that are based on the things you just said. And then I want to see them as soon as I can after that. Because like you want them to sit in like the pain, they say of like, oh, they just talked about all these struggles. And they're like, okay, well, gosh, yeah, now I do really want to solve this problem. So if I'm meeting with them early in the week, if I can get my then sales call by the end of the week or early the next one, because the longer you wait, the less likely they're going to want to do it.
Right.
So, I usually like try to get it by the end of the week if I can. And it doesn't have to be a super long meeting, but that's where I do, like I create my slide deck and I present to them my solutions for the exact things they said. My other issue is I would always overly like academia-ize things, make things too academic, where like if they said, our people just don't know how to like talk to each other okay, and like they get in fights, I'd be like, needs effective communication and conflict resolution. That's not what they said. So if I'm using that terminology in my slide deck, they're like, oh, I think it becomes too vague. It's not, so you got to use their words. If they said people are fighting or avoiding solution or whatever, or I just can't get people to do what I want them to do. And it's like, needs to practice performance accountability. No, that's not what they said. That's what I can teach. But like in my sales meeting, that's different. And so I started like using their exact words in my form and then on the document where I present to them. And then I have like 3 options of packages usually, or I added a 4th that's like more in depth. And,
do you present a PowerPoint then?
Yeah.
That's and you build one for each sales call?
Mm-hmm. And I don't send it to them. And if they're like, oh, just send it to me, it's not, they're never going to close. I mean, at least in my experience, it's so
the key
unlikely.
is to get them on a Zoom call or whatever.
Yeah, or in person.
Yeah.
I present it, and that way I can say like, what hesitations do you have? Like, I want to hear your objections. And if they usually like agree to it in that meeting. We decide on a package, and I'm like, okay, I'm sending you the contract, and we're going to start with our onboarding and our kickoff meetings and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you just keep the momentum going.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's one of the challenges in selling today. I didn't know the podcast was going to go this direction, by the way, but I think it's awesome. Yeah, it's the way that we sell now is completely different than it used to be. We've been in business since 97, and it used to be we'd send out a demo to somebody and they'd get it in the mail, and then hopefully they looked at it. Then we'd call them up, and it's like this whole process. Nothing is like that now.
Oh, yeah.
And lead gen's completely different than it ever has been.
Yeah.
And I just think if you're not staying on top of what's happening in that world, you're going to be left behind pretty quick.
Yeah.
So, yeah, pretty amazing. All right, so a couple more things, and we'll wrap up here. What's a major tip you can share with the audience today if they want to be a better leader?
Oh my gosh. Well,
That's a loaded question, probably. Huh?
yeah, I'm like, oh, I'm surprised by that, but it's literally on my sheet.
You wrote that question.
I'm like, questions you can ask.
I'm like, I'm going to ask that question.
It is a good one. So and this can be hard. I think that like people at networking events will sometimes be like, what's the best tip you can give me?
Yeah.
Or what's your hot take? And I say, like, I think that the most important factor or like trait a leader should have is humility. And I think some people are like, no, it's confidence. And it's like, nobody cares how confident you are if you're an asshole, you know?
Yeah.
So humility doesn't mean you are meek and quiet, and it doesn't mean you think less of yourself. What's that quote? Like, humbleness isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. And
Yeah.
And it's about being teachable. It's that psychological safety again of like somebody can give you feedback or challenge your ideas and thoughts or processes and in a respectful way. And it's not an attack on you. And it's not something where you then need to retaliate against them. And so the humility is like, be teachable. I mean, Jim Collins in Good to Great, that book, every business person's read that pretty much. He talks about that like is it level 5 leaders? Or I'm trying to remember all the levels.
Yeah.
And what set all those like 11 CEOs apart were that they had this drive of like professional or personal will and professional accountability. So he was giving quotes from these amazing CEOs that were like, I never stopped trying to be qualified for my job. And I always was like asking for feedback, even from like lower level people, because those are the people who have like their boots on the ground and they're more likely to know what our clients saying and what are the objections and what's the perception and reputation of our organization out there.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times high level leaders are so like insulated from it. And there was a really cool article from the Atlantic a few years ago where it talked about almost like brain damage they see in high level leaders, either political or business, who if they've been in a high level of leadership for so long and they haven't been intentionally seeking out feedback and performance reviews and things like that, because if they're high up and they're only giving it, people sometimes get scared to tell them the truth and to give them any sort of insight on what they see.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that Dr. Christopher Dunch, who's in prison now, I mean, that's exactly his issue. Like he was not willing to hear anything from anybody else. And that's why 35 people's lives were pretty much ruined because of his neurosurgery. And so the way that we can combat that is with like humility of like, literally seeking out feedback from other people, accepting that you are not always correct and maybe your ideas aren't the best. So we have to like ask for divergent thinking. Like when you're leading a team meeting, you may think this is going to be a great goal for us. Whoa, pause and say like, okay, here's what maybe I'm thinking, but I want divergent ideas. I want to hear from everybody. And then if the introverts aren't speaking up, because that could sometimes happen, it doesn't mean that they don't have amazing thoughts and goals.
Right.
It's maybe that they are just observing and pondering and processing internally. I'm an external processor, so it's hard for me to relate.
I can't tell that.
I know. But then like if they haven't spoken up, I usually say like, remember to ask them like, hey, Sally, at the end, like, I'd love to hear from you. Have you been thinking this through? Do you have any thoughts? And it's not to put somebody on the spot and put pressure on them.
Right.
And so you have to really know the person. But like, I mean, part of being, I think, in a team brainstorming meeting is contributing. So Sally shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
And so then asking, and like literally asking for that idea. So showing that you're humble, it's that part of like role modeling as a leader. And that's where curiosity comes into. So like humility and curiosity are those tips that I would say really lean into. Like the curiosity is it goes along with humility because it's saying like, I wonder why, and you're not assuming the answer, like, and that could be anything like from in nature, like I wonder why and how there are so many microplastics in the ocean. Like, what could we do? Like that sense of wonder and then doing something about it, like get curious and then solve the problem. And the more that like you model that for your team, the more they're going to be innovative. And innovation is, yes, people are going to make mistakes. Maybe you're going to have some failures along the way, but overall, you're going to have a much better and cooler product or service.
Can you learn humility?
I think so, yes. I think unless somebody has a like personality disorder or mood disorder, so like maybe not somebody who's like antisocial personality disorder. I don't know if like Ted Bundy, he may have appeared,
but like a narcissist, that type of person, can they learn humility? I guess that would be the question.
I'm not an actual psychologist, but I don't think so. I've heard that like dated a psychoanalyst for a while, and he was saying that like he can only work with one narcissist client at a time because it's so draining and it's so hard to get them to change. I think the same kind of thing with like borderline personality disorder, where I'm not sure, so I can't totally exactly speak to that stuff.
So I would think like a CEO is going to tend to be more towards that side of it, the narcissistic side, like I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this happen. I'm me type, where they need to be the opposite of that. But that, I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, and they say that like there are more psychopaths in CEO levels than in like the rest of society or whatever. But it doesn't mean like all psychopaths are murderers or trying to kill people.
Right.
But yeah, they may have a little bit, what's the Machiavellian mindset. That's a Taylor Swift word from Mastermind.
Okay.
But yeah, like that.
Can you spell that?
Good question. Not if I had a piece of paper. But yeah, that idea of like they are probably appearing more confident. Yes, they're assertive. They're maybe more dominant. Those are personality traits they have. But it doesn't mean every single one of them is a true narcissist or a psychopath. And so I think that, yes, most people can learn it, and I think they should. I also had a C-suite person at an organization I used to work at who we were talking about the Strengths Finder assessment, which is really cool. And he was kind of bragging and joking about how empathy was his very last one. And it's got to land somewhere, right? Like there's 36 or something.
Not something you want to brag about.
No, especially as a high level leader, like to people who are on your team. I was like, this is not funny. And I love to joke around, Remember, I've got the informal communication is my major thing. But like that's not funny. Like empathy is so important. It's literally trying to feel the feelings and have like grace for somebody for dealing with something else and putting yourself in their shoes. And to say that it's almost funny that you don't have that, that's not cool. I mean, yes, it's got to land somewhere on there, but you can make those strengths. And Strengths Finder people say like it is best to always try to improve on your top ones because you're more likely to improve on the ones you're already good at. And I completely agree. Empathy is one of those things that because it's a component of emotional intelligence, which helps leaders be more effective and more profitable, it's worth investing in being more empathetic.
So how could you have psychological safety without that?
Exactly.
Impossible, right?
No, it's impossible. I mean, yeah, because if you're not showing that you care about others and you're putting yourself in their position, you're probably going to just keep doing what serves you the most, and that's probably going to destroy your business. Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a lot here. We've gone through all of my questions. So the last thing I want to have you do, I don't know if you've seen any of the podcasts, but I always have everybody do a movie voice at the end.
Okay.
So it's the In a World with Real Media. So if you would do that for me, so I just want you to go like, in a world with real media. And we'll see if you have a career as a voiceover artist.
Gosh, that'd be amazing. Okay. In a world with real media. I don't know if my voice was deep enough. But when you first told me the name of it at the Top Gun event, I remember saying, "Oh, in a world." And you're like, yep, that's it.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like it's kind of a shtick that I've always done. And so it's like, I'm going to name the podcast this.
I love it.
And it's funny. So I have a lot of people doing that on the podcast. We actually put together a little funny video, but Lisa Ginter, the CEO of Community America, and people like that doing In a World. This is really funny.
So cool.
So anyway, well, thank you, Haley, for coming on. This has really been great. I'm sitting here thinking, wow, maybe we need to talk more about real media. So I thank you for coming on and appreciate it. And by the way, everybody, be sure to subscribe, share this podcast. Follow us, all those things. In a World with Real Media, it's on all the podcast platforms, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
This has been In a World with Real Media. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to subscribe on iTunes and follow Real Media on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn so you never miss an episode.